G'day everyone, welcome to today's video. So today I'm going to be talking about when you should upgrade your camera or when you should start looking into buying a new camera. It's said a lot by a lot of photographers. The main thing about photography is it's not all about the camera. It's actually about the person behind the camera and how they look at the scene and how they scope out different photos. And by the way, all the tips that I say in this video is all my own experience, my own opinion. I'm not trying to tell you what to do when you should upgrade and when you shouldn't upgrade. It's all down to you at the end of the day. But this is just experience from friends, myself, and other photographers I've spoken to in the past. Yeah, the main thing is it's not about the gear. It's about the photographer behind the camera, how they see the scene, how they scope out compositions. You can really get amazing photos with old cameras. People these days are still using, I know quite a few people that use just a point and shoot and they still get amazing photos. People use their iPhones, and maybe not point and shoot so much anymore, but iPhones, you can get insane photos on that. So really, all you need to start in photography is the thing in your pocket. Phones these days are insane at taking photos. But if you've got an entry-level camera and you're starting out, yeah, I just hope that I can give some insight into my thoughts on that kind of thing. So when I'm talking about upgrading your camera, I'm talking going from crop sensor to full frame or entry-level to professional. So I currently shoot on a Nikon D3300 that came out in about 2014, I think, and it's an entry-level camera, which just means that it's a crop sensor and it's for amateurs. It's for people that are just starting out learning photography. To start off with, one thing to be aware of when you start out in photography is what I'm going to call the gear crave. So the gear crave is this stage where you're starting in photography and you just want to upgrade your camera. You go crazy about the gear. You think cameras, like I love gear. I love gear so much and I want a new camera too. All of us do. You gotta resist buying a camera when you first started out. And I'm gonna talk about why that's important and why buying a camera immediately when you've started out is somewhat a waste of money. So the main thing is you gotta make sure that you're gonna stick with photography. Because if you spend $6,000, which is how much $3,000 body only, but if you're coming from an entry-level camera to a professional, you're gonna need to buy full-frame lenses as well. So you're gonna need a body and a lens with it. So that'll be about $6,500. I'm talking mainly about the Canon 5D Mark IV because that's the one I've been looking at. So it's a lot of money. So you've got to make sure that you're actually going to invest your time and a lot of time into it. Otherwise, you're going to buy this camera and if you don't use it, it's a waste of $6,500 or however much the camera is that you bought. So yeah, the gear crave, this stage in the beginning of photography where you go mad about the cameras, you go mad about the different gear. I have a mate who has a Nikon D5600 and he's just started out in photography. I was doing my course with him and he spoke to me one night about buying a second-hand camera that was about $3,000, I think, and it was a full frame. I think it was a Nikon D850 or something. I might have gotten that entirely wrong, but first off, I don't really buy second-hand cameras, but that's a story for another video. So, and I had to talk to him about all the different reasons why buying a camera immediately wasn't a good idea and why he needs to stick it out and, go full on with entry level and then upgrade. What I thought he should do. So the main thing is developing your own style before you buy a new camera. You gotta know your style, you gotta, mature your eye, or develop your eye for photography, knowing what you like shooting and what you enjoy shooting. Develop your own style, know what kind of photos you look for, and start shooting them. The main way to develop as a photographer, as an artist in general, is by just doing it, experience. My Nikon D3300, it's old, it's really old, but it's still good. It handles noise terribly, and that's why I want to upgrade. But for someone that shoots mainly at sunrise, sunset, middle of the day, you don't even need that. Highest ISO you're normally going to have to go up to is about 400. So, and also as well as that, learn the exposure triangle. Learn how one thing affects another thing, how aperture will affect your shutter speed, how shutter speed will affect your ISO, and it's kind of like a recycle. Understanding the basics of photography. Learn the exposure triangle, learn the basics of photography, how to expose people or landscapes, whatever you like shooting. So one thing also is I don't think I would be as good of a photographer nowadays if I had upgraded to a full frame immediately. I think that I got better quicker because I was shooting on a camera that had quite tight limits. I learned how to compensate for those tight limits to get the photo that I want within the limits of that camera. Knowing how to compensate for the limits of your camera is a great way of developing as a photographer, and I think that's another great reason why holding off buying a professional camera is a good idea. So a lot of professional grade cameras these days have all these different bells and whistles. I can't really think of many on the top of my head, so take this with a grain of salt, but in that way it kind of teaches you how to take photos in more of a thoughtful way. You have to think more about your photos. That's another thing, high dynamic range. The HDR in my camera is shocking. I have to expose for the highlights, and even then sometimes I can't bring the shadows up in Lightroom. And so I've learned techniques of making it so that I can get the whole scene exposed properly. It's also important to experience crop sensor before you experience full frame. I think that crop sensor is actually, I'd say, harder to shoot with than full frame, and in a way that's going to force you to improve quicker. Because think about it this way, right? With exercise, the harder you go, the fitter you get. So with photography, if you shoot with a camera that's harder to shoot with than a full frame camera, or harder to shoot with than another camera, you're going to improve quicker on that camera than you would on the other camera that is easier to shoot with. And that's why it's important to experience crop sensor before you experience full frame, because it would teach you quicker than a full frame camera would. So I would say instead, if you really want to buy a new piece of kit, I'd say buy a lens instead. I know they're not as fun as cameras, but buying a lens, it's great. As a landscape photographer, I'd recommend a 24-70. It depends on what you enjoy shooting. If you do portraits, maybe an 80mm or 35 or 50mm. A nifty 50 is always great. Yeah, I have nothing against buying a new lens. It gives you experience at different focal ranges and stuff like that. The lens controls the aperture, which is a very important part in photography, is aperture. So I'm going to finish up this video soon. So my general rule of thumb is only upgrade if you truly feel like you're being held back by your camera. Like you've hit a brick wall, which is your camera, because your creativity is stuck here and you want to get here, but you can't because of the limits of your camera. Upgrade then if you really truly feel that way. All in all, it's down to you. It's however you feel like shooting. I'm going to finish this video up here. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.